Are you prepared to face the avalanche of misinformation on social media? Discover how new AI technologies can transform the way we understand and combat fake news. When agents are delivered in large quantities, it will affect the world in a way that no one can yet understand. Eric Schmidt, who is CEO of Google, gave an interview at Stanford where he discussed several controversial issues. The video, which was on Stanford's YouTube channel, was available for a while, but then disappeared from the internet. Today, after a long time trying, I managed to find the video and analyze some important excerpts. Next year, you will start to see agents with very large context windows and textual actions. When this becomes widely available, the impact will be much greater than what we have already experienced with social media, in my opinion. These context windows function like short-term memory, and I was surprised to learn that they can be quite long. The technical part that complicates this is that it is difficult to implement and calculate. One interesting thing about this short-term memory is that when feeding an agent with information and asking a question, like using the text from 20 books, it may end up forgetting parts in the middle, in a way that resembles how humans function. There are people creating very large language model agents, LLMs. They do this by studying things like chemistry, understanding the principles of the field, testing, then adding those discoveries to their knowledge. This is very powerful. The third point I mentioned is about textual action. One example of this is that the government wants to ban TikTok. We'll see if that really happens. If TikTok is taken down, here's a tip on what to do. Ask your LLM to do the following. Create a copy of TikTok, steal all the users and the music, customize it for me, produce it in 30 seconds, and launch it. If it's not a success in an hour, do something different but along the same lines. You see how powerful this is. If you can turn any language into a digital command, it's roughly how Python works in this situation. Think that each person on Earth would have their own programmer who does what they want, unlike the programmers who work for me and don't do exactly what I ask. The programmers here understand what I'm talking about. Now, imagine having a programmer who isn't arrogant and really does what you ask, without you having to pay much for it, and with an infinite supply of these programs. All of this should happen in the next 1 or 2 years. However, the AI programmers who can really create complex full-stack applications are still not ready. We hope this changes soon. And when they talk about simply saying download all the music and secrets and recreate, that's not feasible now, as this information is protected and you can't just take it. If the idea is to replicate the functionality, it is certainly possible to do the 3 mentioned things, and I am convinced that the mixture of them will be what will emerge in the next wave. You asked what else may happen. Every 6 months, I change my mind. We are in an odd-even oscillation, and currently, the difference between the best models, of which there are only 3, seems to be growing. 6 months ago, I thought the differences were knowing and invested heavily in startups. Now, I am in doubt. I am in contact with large companies, and they are asking for absurd amounts. 10 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion, up to 100. The Stargate is a matter of 100 billion. It's complicated. I spoke with Sam Altman, a close friend, and he estimates that we will need about 300 billion, maybe even more. I did the math on the amount of energy we will need, and to be completely transparent, I went to the White House on Friday to say that we need to strengthen ties with Canada. They have excellent people who helped develop AI and have a lot of hydroelectric power. Here, we do not have enough energy for all this. The alternative would be to depend on Arab countries, and I quite like them. I spent a long time there, but they won't follow our national security rules. While Canada and the US are part of a group that agrees on many things. These 100 billion, these 300 billion, these data centers, electricity will become a scarce resource. In fact, we do not have enough energy to reach artificial general intelligence, Augie. It simply doesn't roll right now. Eric also thinks we will need more and more data and bigger models to get to AGI. And I agree with that too. Sam Altman said something similar. He said we need to do more with less, or still with the same amount of data, since we've already used everything humanity has created so far. There are no more available data. So we need to find ways to generate synthetic data that are truly useful and not just copies, in addition to doing more with what we already have. You worked for a long time at Google, which created the transformer architecture. And that is the merit of Peter and other brilliant minds there, like Jeff Dean. But now it seems they have lost the pace to OpenAI. In the last ranking I saw, Anthropic's Claude was in first place. I asked Sar about this, but I didn't get a clear answer. Maybe you have a more objective view of what is going on. I am no longer an employee of Google. To be completely transparent, Google decided that prioritizing quality of life and the ability to work from home is more important than winning. This became a big topic when the guy said the company was focusing on work-life balance, going home earlier and not working as much as the competition. They chose quality of life over winning. That is a common perception people have about Google and startups. Startups can succeed because teams work very hard. Sorry to be so direct, but those who leave university and create a company won't let people work from home and only show up once a week if they want to compete with other startups. In Google's early days, Microsoft worked that way. But now it seems that, in our industry, there are several companies that win in a truly creative way and dominate the market without going through this transition. This is well documented. The reality is that founders are unique. They need to be in control, and they are not easy to deal with. They demand a lot from their teams. As much as we may dislike Elon's attitude, look at what he can extract from people. I had dinner with him. That night he was flying at 10 p.m. to have a meeting at midnight with SpaceX. Think with me. I was in Taiwan, in a very different culture, and I heard that TSMC has an interesting rule. Good recent physics graduates work in the factory on the ground floor. Now, can you imagine an American physicist doing that? With a PhD? That is very unlikely. The work ethic is quite distinct, and what I mean is that I am being rigorous about work because these systems have network effects, so time is super important. In most businesses, time is not always that crucial. When you have time abundantly, companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi will still continue to exist, and the competition between them will continue, even if slowly. When dealing with telecommunications companies, a typical contract takes about 18 months to be signed. It makes no sense to take so long to do anything. Let's move on. We are in a phase of maximum growth and great achievements. He was asked about competition with China's AI and AGI, and he replied that we are ahead. We need to stay that way, and money will be fundamental in this competition. I was the chairman of an AI committee that analyzed this very closely. You can read the outcome. It's about 750 pages, and in summary, we need to be ahead. Keep staying ahead. And for that, we will need a lot of investment. Our clients were the Senate and the House, and from that work came the CHIPS Act and several other initiatives. If you imagine that the best models will evolve, and some open source models too, you can see that only a small number of companies or countries will be able to enter this race. Which countries are those? Those that have plenty of money, talent, good educational systems, and the will to win. The US is one of those countries. China is another. How many more are there? I don't know. Maybe some. But certainly, during our lifetimes, the competition between the US and China for knowledge supremacy will be an important theme. The US government practically blocked NVIDIA chips. They couldn't say this openly, But that's exactly what was happening in relation to China. China has about a 10-year advantage in chips. We have a difference of approximately 10 years in terms of sub 5 years. Wow. So the current situation is that we are, for example, a few years ahead of China. I really believe we will continue to pull away a little more from them. And it seems that the Chinese are quite furious and frustrated about it. Let's change the subject and talk about a real war that is taking place. I know you have been very involved in the war in Ukraine and, in particular, about your goal of developing drones that cost only $500 to take down $5 million tanks. How is this changing the battlefield? I worked for the Secretary of Defense for 7 years and tried to reform how we manage our military. I'm not exactly a fan of the armed forces, because it's very expensive, and I wanted to see if I could help. In my view, I largely failed. They told me I received a medal, so apparently, they also award those who don't succeed. My self-criticism is that nothing effectively changed, and the US system will not allow for a true innovation. Seeing the Russians using tanks to bombard apartment buildings, hitting the elderly and children, made me extremely angry. So I decided to work at a company with Sebastian Thrun, who is a friend and former professor of mine, along with several people from Stanford. The main idea is to do two things: use AI in a complex and powerful way for essentially robotic warfare, and the second is to reduce the costs of robots. Now, you might think, why would a liberal like me do this? The answer is that in military theories, we talk about tanks, artillery, and mortars, and we can replace them all. He talks about Ukraine, which has managed to develop simple and cheap drones, spending only a few $100s. They are creating 3D printed drones that have bombs and drop them on million-dollar tanks, and they have already managed to do this repeatedly. So, there's an asymmetric war going on between drones and more conventional artillery. There was an article that Henry Kissinger, and Dan Clear wrote last year about the nature of knowledge and its evolution. I had a discussion about this the other night. For most of human history, we had an almost mystical understanding of the universe. But then came the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. In your article, you argue that now these models are becoming so complex and difficult to understand that, in fact, we do not know what is going on inside them. To quote Richard Feynman, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." This quote is very relevant because now people are creating things that can create, but do not fully understand what is behind them. Is the nature of knowledge changing? Are we about to begin accepting the word of these models, which can explain to us what happens? The analogy I offer is that of teenagers. If you have a teenager, you know they are human, but you can't exactly understand what's going on in their heads. Somehow, we adapted to the presence of teenagers in society, and they eventually outgrow that phase. Therefore, it's likely that we will have knowledge systems that we cannot fully characterize, but that we know their limits, and this might be the best we can achieve. Do you believe we will be able to understand these limits? I believe so, and I think we will become quite competent at it. He mentions how large language models work, which are essentially black boxes. You input a command and get a response, but you don't know why certain nodes within the algorithm activate or how the responses are generated. It really is a black box. A lot of work is being done now to try to unravel what happens behind this, but the truth is we simply do not know. The consensus of my group, which meets every week, is that in the future, the way to approach this, in terms of adversarial AI, will be to create paid companies to break your AI system, instead of human red teams, which is what is currently done. There will be an entire industry of AI systems whose job will be to explore the vulnerabilities of existing AI systems and discover the knowledge these systems possess, which we cannot understand. That makes sense to me. It could also be an excellent project for you here at Stanford. If you have a graduate student who needs to figure out how to attack one of these large models and understand how they work, that becomes an incredible skill to shape the next generation. It makes sense to me that these concepts really go together. Now, let's hear some questions from the students. There's one back there. Can you say your name? You mentioned adversarial AI, and this is related to your earlier comment. I'm curious if you can elaborate more on this. It seemed that beyond the increase in computational capacity and more powerful models, the question of getting these models to do exactly what we want is still far from being resolved. It's essential to ensure that hallucination issues become less relevant as technology advances. I don't want to suggest that they will disappear completely. There should also be testing mechanisms that ensure effectiveness. We need ways to determine if things really work. About the example I gave of the TikTok competitor, I wasn't saying that you should illegally steal anyone's music. What I would do if I were a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, and I hope all of you become entrepreneurs, is that if the project took off, I would hire a series of lawyers to clean up the mess caused by legal issues. However, if no one ends up using your product, it doesn't matter whether you collected all the content in a dubious way. And don't quote me, because you're being recorded. But understand my point. In Silicon Valley, usually, that's how these things work. Companies test things out and fix problems later. Therefore, my prediction is that we will see increasingly high-performing systems with improved testing. Ultimately, adversarial testing will be key, and this will help keep operations within certain limits. The technical term you mentioned is called chain-of-thought reasoning. It's believed that in the coming years we will be able to generate up to 1,000 steps of chain reasoning. Do this, do that. It's like building recipes. Recipes are something you can execute and test to verify if they produced the correct outcome. This systematic approach could facilitate how we interact with and use these models in the future. Now, perhaps that was not my exact understanding of chain reasoning. From my point of view, chain reasoning occurs when you break a problem down into its basic steps and solve each stage, allowing natural progression to the next. This not only enables reproducing the steps, but also offers a structured method for approaching problems systematically. The amounts of money being invested are truly impressive, and I choose to invest in everything because I can predict who will win. The sums that are following me are so large that partly this is due to the fact that the initial capital has already been accumulated, and the big investors, who may not have clarity about what they are doing, feel they need to incorporate an AI component into everything now. They simply cannot perceive the difference. For me, AI is learning systems that truly learn. Therefore, that is a valid definition. Moreover, very sophisticated new algorithms are emerging that represent a type of post-transformers. My longtime friend and collaborator has invented a new architecture that is not a transformer, and I am funding a group in Paris that claims to have done something similar. Thus, there is a huge invention happening, and many innovations are being developed at Stanford. However, there is a perception in the market that the invention of intelligence will provide infinite returns. For example, if you invest $50 billion in a company, you will have to get huge returns from that intelligence to justify that investment. Therefore, it's likely we will go through a massive investment bubble, which will eventually correct itself. This has always happened in the past, and it will probably be true again. As you mentioned earlier, about $1 trillion have already been invested in artificial intelligence, and revenue is still around $30 billion. If the numbers are not wrong, there really hasn't been a significant return on that investment yet. However, the technology theme has always maintained the same: huge initial investments followed by substantial long-term returns in the future. It seems there is some confusion. about what was said earlier, especially related to Google. It is true that the company has always had a philosophy of keeping many of its algorithms and technologies secret, trying to protect its innovations at all costs. Therefore, your point is valid. If the leader binds themselves to a culture that has historically been closed, it raises the question about their current willingness to distance themselves from that approach. You mentioned the company MR in France, which did an excellent job and where you are an investor. It is understandable that the transition to a closed model, especially for more advanced productions, might rise due to the need for revenue and the high costs of development. This is a real tension in the debate between open and closed code in the industry, and your career aligned with open code demonstrates how this approach has its advantages and has been fundamental for the infrastructure of many companies, including Google. Regarding your opinion on software programmers, the idea that their productivity could double is exciting. Focusing on larger teams that deal with millions of lines of code, as you mentioned about Augment, seems like a promising strategy for applying AI, especially because these environments often lack clarity. As for the combination of expanding the context window, agents, and textual action, this synergy is important because it allows the creation of more dynamic and up-to-date models. The context window, indeed, enables models to assimilate more recent information, addressing the issue of being outdated. Current models, as you pointed out, require considerable training time, and the ability to provide updated data is a significant innovation. This could transform interaction with AI models, allowing them to perform more complex and relevant tasks in real time, such as answering questions about current events, like the conflict between Hamas and Israel. The combination of these factors could give rise to new possibilities for the use and application of AI, and that's why I see huge potential beyond what we might currently imagine. The ability to adapt technologies to reflect the present brings a new dimension to the use of artificial intelligence in various contexts. The description you gave about OpenAI's new search product is accurate. The ability to scan and extract information from the web, feeding this information into the context window, truly allows AI to stay updated and relevant, effectively dealing with contemporary issues. The example you cited about ChemC is fascinating and illustrates well how these LLM-based systems can revolutionize areas like chemistry and materials science. The ability to generate hypotheses and conduct experiments in a lab, learning from the results, is a significant leap forward and a true accelerator of innovation. On the issue of having many cheap programmers, this could be a game changer. If each person has access to their own programming instances managed by artificial intelligence, this will transform how we approach technology. The example of asking someone to build a competitor to Google illustrates the implications of this. In a world where anyone can obtain this help, the barriers to entry for new developments and innovations would be drastically lowered. This could, indeed, make incumbents like Google more vulnerable to new competitors. As for the concern about how to prevent AI from influencing public opinion, especially with the spread of fake news during elections, this is a critical issue that needs effective solutions. Here are some short and long-term suggestions. Short-term solutions. 1. Automated fact-checking. Implement systems that use AI to verify information in real time before it's disseminated. This would include fact-checking services that analyze and confirm the veracity of information before it's published or amplified on social media. 2. Media literacy education. Promote media literacy programs to raise awareness of how to identify false information and the use of reliable sources. This would help the public discern between fact and fiction. 3. Transparency in social media algorithms. Social media platforms should be more transparent about how their algorithms prioritize and distribute content, allowing users to better understand what they consume. Long-term solutions. 1. Regulation and ethical guidelines. Develop clear guidelines for the use of AI news and social media, including penalties for the deliberate spread of misinformation. 2. Development of ethical AI technologies. Invest in research and development of AI systems that prioritize accuracy and truth in information. This could include creating models that are programmed to question and validate contradictory information. 3. Multi-stakeholder collaborations. Engage different stakeholders, including governments, tech companies, NGOs, and academic institutions, to create a collaborative ecosystem dedicated to combating misinformation in the digital age. These approaches address the issue of misinformation not only in the immediate context but also ensure a safer and more informed future where AI can be a positive tool in promoting knowledge and truth. You touched on a crucial point about disinformation and its relationship with social media, which will be one of the major challenges in the upcoming elections and on a global level. The dynamic you mentioned about TikTok, with claims that the platform favors a certain type of misinformation at the expense of another, reflects the complexity of these platforms and their impact on public opinion. The fact that misinformation has become such an intrinsic part of public and political discourse is indeed alarming. The ability to discern between truth and misinformation is a skill that needs to be developed. But as you said, this can be a monumental challenge. Critical thinking must be encouraged from a young age, which implies a reform in education, especially in a context like the US, where polarization and distrust in institutions are high. Your experiences on YouTube under Ian's management, where serious problems rose from the upload of fake videos, exemplify how misinformation can have real and even tragic consequences. The no deaths policy underscores the urgency of effectively addressing these issues. As for the textual action and its impact on education in computer science, I believe we are on the verge of significant transformations. 1. Integration of AI in the curriculum. AI tools and textual action can be incorporated into the computer science curriculum, allowing students to learn how to use artificial intelligence practically and efficiently. This would help students apply these technologies in real projects, facilitating a deeper understanding of their potentials and limitations. 2. Emphasis on ethical practices. Education should include a strong emphasis on ethics and responsibility when working with artificial intelligence and software development. As students become future creators of technology, it is essential they understand the implications of the tools they use, especially regarding misinformation, privacy, and social impact. 3. Development of critical thinking. Just as learning a language is an ongoing process, education in computer science should encourage students to think critically about how to develop and utilize technologies. They should learn not only how to code, but also to question how and why they are creating the solutions they are. 4. Collaborative learning. Education should encourage interdisciplinary collaboration, where computer science students can work with students from other fields, such as social sciences, journalism, and philosophy. This interaction can enrich the understanding of technology's broader impacts and contexts. 5. Preparation for a changing world. Educational programs should adapt rapidly to technological changes. Formal education in computer science should be agile enough to incorporate new technologies and methods, ensuring that students are always up to date with the latest innovations. Programmers will always be needed, just as knowledge of programming becomes essential for many other professions. Teaching not just programming languages, but also logical reasoning and problem solving will be crucial. Ultimately, understanding how these systems work is not just about being prepared, but also about being able to positively influence the direction in which technology advances. Did you enjoy the content? Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell to stay updated on all our videos. Together, we can make a difference in the fight against misinformation.